Father Frank Brennan is a Jesuit priest and Professor of Law at the Australian Catholic University in Canberra. He drove from the south coast of New South Wales to join us in our Sydney studio just a short time ago. Father Brennan, thanks so much for coming in tonight.
Good to be with you.
Now, you were opposed to a Royal Commission per se. What are your reservations?
I was opposed to a National Royal Commission because I thought there were a number of state inquiries underway that could be useful. And my concern about a National Commission, I would hope for the sake of victims nationwide that it will bear fruit. My worry has been that a National Royal Commission, for example, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, which was restricted to 99 deaths over just a 10-year period, that took 3.5 years. So I think a commission of the breadth that the Prime Minister has announced, if it was to be anything more than broad brush, but if it were to have the particularity that we were looking for with state inquiries, I think it will take at least 5 years.
So would it have been better to have been kept to just the Catholic Church?
I don't know whether just to the Catholic Church or whether within the jurisdictions that were conducting these things. Let's remember within the Federation that we have that most of the agencies which deal with children are under state jurisdiction. And at the moment in the three most populous states, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, there are inquiries presently running, and they are running as a result of royal commissions that have been previously held. So my concern is simply that at a national level, a royal commission asking the feds to come and investigate the states, particularly where it's a federal Labor government on a ropes in the lead up to a federal election with Liberal state governments. I think there are all sorts of complications there, and I would hope for the sake of the victims that things do not get too politically messy.
The Prime Minister, in making her announcement today, said the Royal Commission would look at institutional responses to abuse. From what you've seen thus far, has the Church always, in your view, put the welfare of children first?
No, it has not. And I think particularly prior to 1997 there's been abundant evidence that the Catholic Church, which is the church I know best, the interests of children were not put first, and often it was the interests of the church as an institution or of particular clerics who were spared and children were sacrificed.
And is it still policy to move a priest to another diocese if he is accused of abuse or convicted and then released?
As I understand, since 1997, with the protocols that have been put in place, definitely not. If there have been breaches of that, then it's not only a breach of the law, it's a breach of the Church's own protocols.
So is there a structure in place to determine that that definitely won't happen?
There is. After the Wood Royal Commission in New South Wales, we had a protocol set up nationally for the Catholic Church, as for other equivalent churches. It's been accepted since 1997 that every church has to have a protocol in place, as should any organisation that's dealing with children. Definitely there have been problems. The Catholic protocol, I know, has been revised twice with independent legal advice, but there are still criticisms of it from victims, their families and their loved ones. There's still work to be done. The question is how that's best to be improved.
Is it time to rethink the vow of celibacy in the Catholic Church?
Well, that's another debate, but I definitely think that there would be some individuals in the Catholic Church with a vow of celibacy as Catholic priests who, to put it very bluntly, if they were married, they probably would be abusing their own children. But definitely, I think there is a case for reviewing that. But at the moment in Rome, there's no appetite for it at all, as we know.
Is there an appetite here in Australia, do you think?
Of course there is, if you speak to diocesan priests generally. But at the moment, anyone who's made a bishop will be of the view that basically it shouldn't be changed. And so what we're dealing with is a social institution which is in something of a time warp on those sorts of questions.
Why do you think the Catholic Church all over the world is finding it so hard to recruit priests?
It's not all over the world, but definitely in Western countries where there's a strong notion of individual freedom and of liberty, then definitely the question has been, why would you live a life of this sort? And I think in a country like Australia at the moment, with abuse and that sort of thing, the question for a young person would be, why would you bother?
You've said before that there is a disproportionately high number of child abusers among the Catholic clergy. Why do you think that is?
That I don't know. I was referring to the evidence that was given before the Victorian inquiry by Professor Patrick Parkinson. Now, the thing about Parkinson is he is an independent lawyer who's done a lot of work both for the Catholic Church and for the Anglican Church, and he drew a comparison of the figures between the Catholics and the Anglicans. Now, that's an area where I think a lot more work is needed to be able to explain that. And at the moment, even Catholics, those of us of goodwill, we don't have an explanation for that. And I think that's where work is needed, and that's why in the past I've said the Victorian inquiry, under-resourced as it is, has available to it the retired Justice Frank Vincent, who I think is one of the most outstanding retired criminal law judges in the country. And so I think to be able to draw on the resources of people like him as they forensically investigate those questions is critical. My worry now with a national Royal Commission, which isn't just looking at the Catholic Church, but looking at agencies right across the board, I think it's going to be another 5 years before we get those sorts of forensic answers, which I was hoping we might get within some months.
Now, former priest Kevin Lee joined us here on the program on Friday, and he said, and I quote to you, that in the course of his life as a priest, I became aware, he says, that some of the other priests were actually pedophiles and were not necessarily becoming priests because they wanted to help people, but because they were pedophiles who wanted the opportunity. What's your response to that?
Well, my own personal experience is quite different, and I say thank God for that. But if there is evidence of that sort of thing, then I think it's highly regrettable. Definitely the figures we've heard in Victoria indicating that there seems to be a high percentage compared with the Anglicans of those coming through the seminary there who have been offenders, then I think it's very troubling for all of us. I mean, let's keep the focus on the victims and their families, but this is also highly troubling and very deeply shaming for those of us who pride ourselves on being loyal members of the Catholic Church.
Is there something wrong with the structure of the Catholic Church insofar as there is no sort of umbrella hierarchical structure here in Australia? It is so state and diocese based, so it's very hard for you to know perhaps if a priest's been moved from interstate or indeed from overseas, what his particular past has been.
I think there are now protocols in place that deal with that. If I may say, I think the real problem with the Catholic Church is the sort of unaccountable clericalism. I was preaching in my parish in Canberra on Sunday, and I told them the story. I'd been in Rome 2 years ago. I attended a meeting. I went across with 2 of my brother Jesuits from the United States. I attended a splendid concert that the Vatican put on, and there was Pope Benedict, and as the symphony played, an American priest turned to me and said, "That man beside the Pope, that's Cardinal Law." He said, if he was back home, he'd be in jail. I was very ashamed at that moment, and I thought there is a structural problem, but it's not in terms as you've discussed. I think it's more the sort of unaccountable clericalism of a male celibate hierarchy, and I think there are fundamental challenges for the Church in the 21st century.
He'd be in jail for what?
Well, for things to do with failure to deal adequately with priests who'd been proven to be engaged in child abuse.
So the accountability or the lack of accountability goes that high up within the Church?
Sadly, it does.
So do you have faith in the ability of your Church to deal with these matters in such a way that protects children?
I think the Church is a very broken institution, but one of the great things in living in a country like Australia is that we robustly pride ourselves on the rule of law, and we're a pluralist democratic society where the Church is not exempt from things on the basis of some spurious pleading of freedom of religion. And so what's essential, and I think this is accepted in good faith, I mean the statement by our Australian Catholic bishops today indicates they're accepting of a Royal Commission. They'll do anything they can to cooperate. Now, the cynics about the Church will say, well, of course they'd say that now, wouldn't they? But I think part of the reality of living in a pluralist democratic society is the people you meet in church every Sunday, they're members of the Church, but they're also citizens of a robust pluralist democracy which prides itself on the protection of the vulnerable, including the most vulnerable children. But what's going to be shown from this Royal Commission isn't only churches, it's the nation as a whole, and there are going to be very political questions as to what's ruled in and what's ruled out with a national commission of this inquiry.
We look forward to speaking to you again as the inquiry takes shape. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you. Good to be with you.